Okay, so we are gonna talk about just some of the difference between Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop and strategies for an efficient workflow. So just from a larger view, we know it's like there's things that both Adobe Camera Raw and Photoshop can do pretty well. But where do you start? And are there a couple things that one definitely does better than the other? Let's take a look. So I'm just going to open up an image that haven't really done anything to. Well, I guess I had, but I will reset those to the default. So when you open up an image in Adobe Camera Raw, you do what is suggested. You just kind of go down and you kind of, from the editing standpoint, you go downwards. There are a lot of tools here that are also available in Photoshop. You can do the crop tool here. You can do the crop tool in Photoshop. Probably good to start in here because it's easy to come in and reevaluate it and change it back. But crop tool in Photoshop also works. When we talk about the basics, you just kind of go around, and of course, one place you can start out is you can start with auto. If you like what that's doing, then you can keep it. You click it again if you don't, and choose a different type of, just a kind of a manual approach. So make some adjustments, thinking about like what you want, what's important to you, how do you want to show the detail, right? But so we want to do as much as we can in Adobe Camera Raw. That's the definite starting point. Curves works fairly well here. It works pretty similar to the way that it works in Photoshop, to be honest with you. However, there are not maybe quite as many control points, and I think it's just something that I will do a little bit of an adjustment curve. Sometimes I might like to make a little tweak to increase contrast, but increase contrast right here. But there's other times where I will do that inside Photoshop. One of the side things, I don't know if you noticed, but when you increase contrast, one of the side effects is an increase is saturation, right? So when I just make a little bit of bump here, it's became more colorful in my image. So I may decide to downplay it up here on the actual color slider. Detail is great because this helps you sharpen your image. So you want to do that at the 100% level on what's in focus, and you can overdo this. If you do overdo it, what tends to happen is hopefully you can see these little grain-like kind of patterns that are appearing on the surface everywhere. That's a sign of over sharpening, right? We don't want that. Really don't want that to be kind of popping out of my image. We want kind of a more natural grain structure. So you can see as I increase this, that just gets ramped up. And when it becomes visible, I'm now looking at 300 to 400%, which is really a little overkill, too close. But I wanted to give you a sense of that texture and how that's being changed. So I wouldn't go over 40. I don't think you need to have it at 0, but somewhere between 20 and 40 is probably a good place to be. And the color noise, somewhere between 25 and 50 is also a good place to be. So let's set this back to 100 because that's probably a better place to look at that. We definitely want to use the detail. Color mixer is really great for just making spot color adjustments to different colors. So I have this red thing here and these orange things. If I don't want those to be as visible and tangible, this is a great place for me to click on the red, decrease the saturation so that red doesn't pop as much. Sometimes the orange, I will probably do the same thing. I can really take away the intensity of that if I don't want it to be so noticeable in this image. Sometimes it helps to do some effects, like I could try to make the grass a little bit greener here, increasing the saturation. doesn't seem like it's actually having a ton of an effect on the greens, but I'm sure in the yellows, if I make the yellows a little bit more green, you can see that that kind of switched the way that that looks. So I'll come back to color in a minute in Photoshop. Split toning is a great thing. You can also do this in Photoshop under the black and white adjustment layer, but that's there. The optics is excellent. And these are things, the profiles for different lenses, you can't only, I don't think you can really access in Photoshop. So this is the place to do that. You can, and it'll know like this is, I shot this with my Hasselblad camera and I can, it has the profile for the lens. And if I don't like exactly how it's done, I can come in and make a custom adjustment to it, start at that point, and then like decrease this. So one of the things it does is it brightens up that, tries to like counteract the natural vignetting that happens with the lens. So if I don't want to go full-fledged on that, I can also reduce that down while it's still dealing with the barrel distortion. Diffringing is a good place if sometimes that happens around the edges of objects depending on the lighting, and you have to kind of, if you see that, you can use this to sample the diffringing and it'll try to automatically adjust that. So that's a useful tool. The geometry can also be a useful tool if you're trying to, if you have an image and it's not straight on, it's a little bit skewed, this can help you with that. There's also a good tool for that in Photoshop as well. And then vignetting and grain are two things you may want to do as an effect. Vignetting, this is really effective tool. It's pretty hard to do the same thing in Photoshop, so this is a great place to do vignetting. Now, when you come into Photoshop, one of the things that is really useful is colorizing effects on an image. So just this idea of going to color balance and being able to add, say, like a red cast to something like this, even if it's subtle, that's something that's very hard to do in Adobe Camera Raw. The only place that you can change color cast is with the white balance tool. Now, the white balance tool in Adobe Camera Raw, you can't find that type of tool here in Photoshop. The closest you can do is come to the color balance tool and adjust like kind of this slider, which is warmth and like kind of cool versus warm tones, but it's not the same adjustment. It's these, if you add blue like this, that is not the same thing as adding blue in Adobe Camera Raw, which you've probably noticed. But if I come up here and I adjust this setting, it's just not quite. If I warm this up like this and add warmth, it's not the same thing as if I come in here and add yellow. That type of yellow is just not the same. However, you can add this, but sometimes it's just very useful to be able to add a tint or color shift through this tool. So this is a great place to do secondary color balancing, is you can do that right here in Photoshop. Another thing that's also very effective in Photoshop is to use, if you want to colorize an image, to use the Hue Saturation, and you click the colorize button down here and it'll just add like a color. It's a monochrome and basically makes it a black and white image with a color on both the highlights and the shadows, so it's very uniform. Now you can do that split toning effect also in Adobe Camera Raw, and it's sort of similar. You can get effectively something quite similar actually, but this is very quick and easy to create different colorized looks. The other thing about Photoshop is there's a lot of things like there's filters that we haven't talked a lot about. One of the things actually to know about with filters is you can add a Camera Raw. If you happen to have an image that wasn't originally processed in Adobe Camera Raw, but you want some of those features like adjusting white balance, you can come in and you can add a correct Camera Raw filter to your image layer, and it will actually simulate, go into what looks like Adobe Camera Raw, and you can make your adjustments. So let's say if I wanted to change my color balance. Just make it, I should just make it something really obvious like blue. Can come back into this and adjust that. Of course, I need to turn off my hue saturation so I can see that effect. But that was very easy to do. So there's also just a lot of subtle tools and manipulation of the image that some things, as you get more advanced, that Photoshop can do and just Adobe Camera Raw can't. So, and at the same time, there's a lot of things that both can do, and some of them, whether you want to do the crop tool in Photoshop or Adobe Camera Raw, can just be a question of where you like the tool and think it works better. All right, hope you guys found that useful.